Can a database of microscopic marks taken from a gun every time it's transferred, or just the first time, solve crimes or prevent it? Doing the technical first, but I'm going to be mentioning the real world in a minute and why both sides of the political argument, because they're politicians, won't cover the subject correctly. So we're going to cover it correctly first. A bolt face, the bolt, the part that actually comes in contact with the back end of the cartridge. A bolt's face, firing pin, extractor claw that pulls on the cartridge to get it out and throw it out. Ejector rod, which pushes usually on the other end to get it to pirouette out, but isn't necessarily required to be there. Or a barrel's integral chamber, which is normally the most common type thing, and rifling. All of this that leaves microscopic and macroscopic marks on the bullets themselves, the empty shell casings. All of these are easily swapped out because they can wear out and or because that's how you field strip the gun to clean it. With the exception, oddly enough, of the ejector rod or equivalent in some guns, all of them are part of the upper receiver on any reciprocating slide-based handgun. Not all of them, but a large number of them that are sold currently. From the cheapest to some of the most expensive, the majority of the parts that you'd have to remove and throw away and change out for another one to completely change almost every characteristic. The majority of them are in one collection of parts you could chuck in a river. But that's assuming the bullet and shell casings have the marks. Optimized and accurized versions of these very often are polished to the point they leave no marks. Whether the cartridge is fired or unfired, whether the bullet's recovered whole or blasted to bits because it's a hollow point that hit a person or bounced off something, it's not relevant because there's nothing to trace. The reason they're able to swap out is simply the way they're designed, but also because they wear out, because people want to upgrade them, because changing the chamber and barrel combination in that one piece, the barrel chamber integral combination, can allow some guns to change to a slightly different caliber. You can go from 9mm to 357 maybe, or something like that. Various guns have this ability, and that's it. Also, Wildcat cartridges exist, and people sometimes use very strange cartridges that aren't used anymore in a gun that they happen to fit. Also, people optimizing their guns replace all of the parts eventually over time for, the reason of buying a cheap gun and changing out the bad parts. The next thing is, if you do all of this stuff at factory, a good example is the Glock. Right? Its barrel doesn't leave real rifling. It's harder to trace. Or an even better example, something that leaves a shit ton of marks. A high point. It's an almost unfinished product. It's roughly done. But if you just make it to where it will feed correctly and eject correctly and run right, you end up polishing away virtually everything that would identify it if you made a record at the point of sale or in the factory. Or you could just buy replacement parts. Again, almost all of these parts are easily purchased and swapped. And not to mention that you can hand optimize them or just make it to where they have nothing traceable. Because the traceability is based on them altering the casing and the bullet. Up to and including altering a barrel or buying a barrel that wipes the rifling off because it's a high accuracy barrel in a race gun. A gun that's used to fire in competitions where the bullet comes out spinning, the rifling did its job, but then it wipes it by squeezing it through to get a little extra speed out of it, and most of the rifling is distorted to where the bullet comes out nearly perfectly smooth. It does have a particular pattern to it. None. Never mind the impact destroying any evidence that was there or distorting it heavily. Any breach of privacy you would assume with a database being updated every time the gun is transferred, or if it is even allowed or required in your state that it be recorded when transferred. None of this is traceable to the serial number on the receiver frame because nothing about a receiver's frame in almost all guns, not all, but virtually all guns, the receiver leaves no marks on the cartridge or bullet. In virtually all guns, not all, but virtually all of them. The chamber and barrel are one piece of metal. And anything from a cheap-ass high point to a good quality Glock to the gun that's being discussed in the sleuthing community concerning the Delphi case. Just changing the barrel changes out 90% or more of all marks. Now, if you bought the barrel from the same company that made the other one, all of these barrels may have identical patterns to it. Hiding in the weeds by having everything match up might be advantageous if you're trying to be traceable. But then again, you could buy the slightly more expensive barrel for $50 more that's so clean and optimized and perfect that it leaves nothing on the casing. For reloaders, because they want the cases to have no defects in them. I'm going to bring up an extreme example in a minute if I can. The serial number on the frame, which people yell and scream about concerning ghost guns, does not cause the bullet or the shell casing to be traceable. The breech face or the bolt face with a plate for the cartridge to press against, the back of it, with a firing pin in the middle, usually, and maybe a claw on the side that pulls the cartridge out when it's ejecting it, and another one that might push on it on the other end to get it to spin and come out of the gun. That's the ejector rod or ejector plate or bar. All of those can be made to where they leave no marks. This might be done to improve the speed or efficiency or stability of the gun, to accurize it, to optimize it, to make it to where it doesn't move as much. People can choose to use ammunition that produces very little recoil, which means it doesn't imprint much into the cartridges in the first place. And again, none of this matters because you can go throw. The gun, the traceability to you is based on the serial number. If you did that in the first place by putting on a bunch of parts that you bought off eBay, what traceability? Well, aren't those serialized? They don't have to be. There's no law about traceability for them. And if you make a law about traceability, people just make their own because it's not illegal in the United States to make every part of a gun from scratch yourself and not put a serial number on it or tell anybody you did it. In fact, I don't know why anybody would do anything like tell anybody. Gun serial numbers are forensically useless unless you did do a database like this. Let's talk about that. And the forensic data obviously is useless if you can just change it out. Again, in 2017, a cartridge was found that somehow matches a gun now in someone who is assumed to be aware of the fact that he's committed a crime while in possession of this gun, but didn't even accidentally at any time replace the barrel or have any wear and tear. I mean, that's possible. In fact, very likely depending on the temperament of the person. But that's a stretch. How do we know he didn't just buy another barrel or have it taken in for service and they swapped out the barrel? Does the barrel have a serial number? Is that important? A serial number traces the gun first to the company that made it after you figure out what company made it. Then the wholesaler or dealer that got it afterwards. Then to the original buyer, and only if there's paperwork done. Not all guns had paperwork for the original buyer. There's a brisk market in old guns where the original buyer is not listed anywhere. Traceability ends usually only traced to the original buyer. But in a few states, every time there's a transfer, if someone wants to follow the rules and isn't worried about their privacy, it would trace to the last legal owner. All of these, however, could have just given the gun away, which in virtually every state does not require transfer. You're giving a gun to someone. And or you can legally leave the state without doing the paperwork they may require by going to a state that doesn't require it and sell it to somebody and just remember the guy's name, Joe. Even if you had a personal check and the check went through, that may not really lead anywhere. No trace may be required in some other area. Next, a person could just lose the gun or it could be stolen. Now I'm going to bring up criminal activity. Again, people say we have to do something, and then they ignore all of it. The majority of people who die from bullet hitting them did it to themselves. And in a large number, crazy large number, it's a gun they bought to protect themselves from some perceived threat while ignoring the threat in the mirror. Depending on where you are, it's 60% to 70%, sometimes 80% of the deaths are people using their own gun on themselves. Let's not talk about that because we can't do anything about it. Really? So this is supposed to help them. Yeah, everything tracks. It's not a murder. That's about it. That's what we can do. This is us throwing up our hands and saying we did something. Okay, what about anywhere from a third to a quarter of the actual deaths caused by somebody else? I'm talking about the real numbers. The vast majority of these people are criminals shooting each other, not disinterested bystanders like you and me, not targets of crime who aren't criminals. No, I'm not kidding about this. And they are immediately excluded from most statistics because no matter whether or not it's law enforcement, FBI, CIA, or a politician, they all want to ignore things. Again, I can't do anything about it. Or they don't care. Or the voting public would rather have the criminals shoot each other. Because they're in competition with each other for the same resources, stolen goods and contraband. The majority of people who are trying to steal from a warehouse or your house are trying to avoid ever firing a gun. They bring it with them in case someone points a gun at them because, don't matter if you like it, they don't want to die, so they're going to fire back. If for no other reason to fire suppressing fire and run away. 80% of the fully automatic Glock conversions found in LA, when they ask them dead ass, why do you have it? So I can spray while I'm running away. I'm not trying to kill anybody. I want them to stop shooting at me. 80% of all shooting deaths in crime are returned fire, meaning even though they were involved in a criminal act with a firearm, so they are going to go to prison, they were literally just defending their own life because someone fired first and missed. The rest of them, like 20%, are actually first shot, first hit, succeeding in committing murder. And the majority of these people who return fire fail at committing accidental murder or manslaughter. It doesn't matter what the politicians or the prosecutor can reframe it as so they can put you in jail for 20 years. What really happened was the vast majority of all of these cases are either from here to here, people killing themselves. Here to here, people returning fire because someone shot at them when they were trying to steal something. Legit, it's a good reason to shoot at them, but they weren't really trying to get in a firefight. And over here, people who legit were just shooting. These are the actual attempted murders. If someone's trying to steal from your house, they don't want to come in contact with you. Not because they give a damn about your life, but because you're a pain in the ass. Seriously. Trust me, the one time someone got in my house, I was a pain in the ass. You're not a threat. No, but I've got a bunch of furniture piled on you and you're not leaving. This person was trying to find some way to get an axe to get out of there. He didn't care about me. He was just pissed. Still got arrested. I broke some china. He had a gun, wouldn't fire it. You know why? He didn't want to go to jail. That was the biggest thing. Didn't matter if the gun was stolen. Most of them have guns that are stolen or whatever, but the reason they have their gun, it's reliable. It doesn't jam. They can hit a target. Or if they can't hit a target, it'll at least spray the area if they keep pulling the trigger. Or they put a full auto glockenspiel thing on it to shoot auto mode. The point is, in all those cases, all they have to do at the end of it is click a couple of things and take off the upper receiver. They don't even have to take out the cartridges at that point. Take the upper receiver section or the slide and all the other parts and throw it in the frickin' East River and move on. Some will do more than that. And again, if the guns are used long enough, they don't have any traceability to them anyway. Either because they're totally smoothed out or because they're totally different than the last time they were used. The serial number on the side of it, whether you wipe it off or not, doesn't have anything to do with ballistics unless you can connect it directly. The vast majority of cases that are solved are because there was a confession or other evidence. Claims of CSI grade stuff are almost always dubious. Creating a database every time a transaction happens has to mean that all transactions are traced. Criminals don't offer that option. And again, 90% of the parts that would be traceable are parts you can freely trade. And if you want to restrict that, fine. Last thing. I can build a shotgun that's untraceable simply because it's a break action, and I know how to build it to where it's very tightly fitting, so the cartridge doesn't even move and it doesn't leave any marks. Even the chemistry of it doesn't change by having residue because just keep the gun clean. Your average conspicuously attentive gun owner would leave less traces than anybody else. Again, none of these people are are KGB assassins. They're just ordinary people doing what they ordinarily do, and they're still harder to trace than anything out of a bad movie. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck.